Hi, everybody. This is Hazlitt with the Lawrence Public Library. The following video is a conversation I had with Annika and Ross, who are two Americans living in Australia right now. They have moved to both New Zealand and Australia, and they had this conversation with me to share with people at Lawrence Public Library what it was like for them to move abroad. If you've seen our other video with the four people who moved to Europe, we go a little bit less into the nitty-gritty details of moving abroad in this video, but there's still lots of good information, so I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. If you have not seen the video with the European immigrants, you can find it on the library's YouTube page. So enjoy, thank you.
We're both from Colorado originally, but we were living in Minnesota when we made the move abroad.
Yeah, but I mean, we'd lived a bunch of places in the U.S. You know, we bounced around a bunch.
Yeah.
Just we're both geologists, so you know, you kind of go where the work is. So,
yeah.
But the reason we made the big jump was actually for me to go back to school. So that was the real deciding factor. And Annika's actually the person who found the listing for the position that I had applied for. Yeah. And she was like, this looks like something you'd be really interested in. You should apply. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't think I'm going to get it, but okay. So I applied, waited like 5 months, interviewed, waited another couple of months, nothing. And finally, like I was emailing, trying to get a hold of it. The person's name is Andrew McIntosh. And he's like, yeah, we really liked you. We want to interview you again. So we chatted. And like 15 minutes after that interview ended, they offered me the position. So,
yeah.
And that was in like September of
2015.
2015.
So we should clarify, this was how we moved to New Zealand.
Yeah, this is New Zealand.
So.
And it was all really abrupt.
Yeah, so this was a PhD position that he was applying for.
Yeah, and so they wanted me to come down and do some field work with them. So that happened in like January of 2016. So like all very, very abrupt. I was still working full time, so like had to take about a month off and like go off to the other side of the planet. It was really cool. It was really, really, really interesting. And like in that time frame, you know, we moved ourselves, you know, we got rid of everything that we had. Well, not everything, but we sold a lot of our stuff, including our car, and then made the jump across the Pacific.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was working, I mean, we were both working full time, obviously, but I work in environmental consulting. And so initially, we were like, well, it's a 3-year PhD position, so we'll just move abroad for 3 years. And I had always wanted to live in New Zealand. Like I visited there in 2008 and absolutely loved it. And so that was part of the reason when I saw this PhD position posting, I was like, hey, Ross, you should apply for this. But the company, one of the things that made it more feasible is the company I worked for in the US is part of this like international alliance of companies, and one of the partner companies is in Australia. So I kind of touched base with them and I was like, hey, I'm going to be in the area, I might be able to do some consulting for you. And so we moved to New Zealand with that kind of like in the back of our mind that I might be either moving to Australia or like working for this company from New Zealand. So we kind of had that, like it wouldn't totally derail my career.
That was
a big thing.
That's been a big focus. Like neither of us want to derail each other's career. And making that work in the geosciences is actually kind of difficult.
Yeah,
really.
But when we were moving, we basically, I know one of your questions was like, what'd you do with your stuff? We sold all of our furniture,
the majority of our stuff.
A bunch of our stuff. We just had this like massive garage sale and got rid of a lot of our stuff.
A bunch of stuff.
Sold our car. We had We had 2 cats when we moved, but moving pets to New Zealand is extremely hard and extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So they have to go through was it a 6-week quarantine
Yeah.
or something like that?
Yeah. I think it was a 2-month quarantine.
And if at any point anything, like they get a cold or they get it all sick, they'll just be euthanized.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and on top of that, it was like $2,000 or $3,000 a cat.
It's more than that.
Like
it was a lot of money.
It was insane. So luckily
Yeah.
my parents said that they would take care of our cats for us.
Yeah.
So it was really hard, but we left our cats in the US. And then everything we took with us, we basically just like put in duffel bags.
We have these, they're just these massively giant duffel bags.
Yeah.
And we jammed those things full of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the things that we would want. And then
we both
3
have
boxes.
we had 3
shipped to
boxes
us,
that we shipped.
which was a terrible idea. It was extremely expensive. It would have been cheaper for us to like purchase extra carry-on, or not carry-on, but extra luggage.
Yeah.
And yeah, we thought that we were doing it the cheap way, and I've since come to find out we did that not the most expensive way, but
pretty close. Yeah, so that was not the best plan. Plus it took like 3 months for stuff to get there, and then
it was a long time.
It was stuck in customs up in Auckland for like another month.
And then when I made the jump across what's called the ditch, the Tasman Sea, from New Zealand to here, I basically just traveled with a couple of bags, but I did it over a couple of trips. So we got probably about the same amount of stuff for way less.
Yeah.
So traveling with at least on Air New Zealand, traveling with your stuff as extra extra items of luggage is
it's a lot cheaper.
The way to go. Yeah,
that's a good tip, I think. Because I think people sometimes might think like you did. So Ross, so you moved over for the PhD position or program, and then Annika, you went along as a spouse, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so I went along. So the visa we were on was, Ross was the main visa holder, so he was on a student visa.
Yeah.
And then I went along on what's called a partner visa. And so Ross had to do the majority of the paperwork for the visa since he was the main visa holder. But the weirdest thing I thought was we had to like prove that we were in a relationship. And so I was like, oh, I'll just send our marriage certificate. Like that proves that we've been married for 3 years or however long we've been married at that point.
Yeah. As one would think, it's the legal marriage certificate that everybody signs.
Yeah, and Immigration New Zealand came back to me and they're like, no, that's not enough. So I had to type up this huge long description of like, okay, this is our relationship. This is when we met. This is when we lived together. And I had to send pictures. Yeah, I had to send pictures from various points in our relationship.
They do not screw around.
Yeah, it was crazy. So
yeah.
But like I said, Ross had to do most of the paperwork.
Yeah.
And for moving to New Zealand, we actually had to get
FBI background checks.
Well, yeah, you had to do that for Australia too. But we had to get, I was gonna say, pretty extensive health exams.
Yeah. Yep.
Which and part of the reason with New Zealand, it's just such a small country that they only have like, what was it? It was like 1 dialysis machine in the entire country. And
they have 1 MRI.
1 MRI. So if you have like any pre-existing conditions, it's really hard to move there just because the health care infrastructure isn't.
Well, I mean, it's
there, but it's not like.
And it's designed for, the 5 million people that live in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, New Zealand is very small.
Yeah.
So
in terms of area, it's the same area as Colorado. And in terms of population, it's actually about 5.5 million people.
Total.
So it's very, very small.
Yeah. So unless you're in Auckland, which is like the big city.
Yeah.
It can be really hard to get healthcare.
Yeah.
And we were in Wellington, which is the capital. So I mean, I guess
it's also a big city. It's not
also
the biggest, but it's definitely a big city.
But yeah, so that was
that was surprising.
Interesting. Yeah, it was definitely surprising.
Yeah.
Because that was like on the health form we had to fill out. It was like, do you have It was asking just all the different, like, do you have all these different diseases? And then somewhere on there, it actually said, like, there are only 2 dialysis machines in the country. So if you need one, like, you are probably not going to get a visa.
Yeah. And probably you don't want to go there because you might not be able to. So,
But it was, so that was about the only, that and having to describe our relationship were the 2 surprising things in that visa. I remember thinking it was like kind of challenging to do the visa, just a lot of paperwork, but then having done it again multiple times in Australia, I'm like, oh, it's no big deal. But the first time was definitely like a little overwhelming.
I think the other interesting thing about the visa process for New Zealand specifically is that they actually put, like, they took your passport from you and they put a big old
you get like a sticker in it.
That is your physical visa, so you show that.
Yeah.
But in Australia, everything's just tied to your passport number, so it's all digital. It's all for which I actually kind of like the thing with my passport because it was kind of fun.
So it means in Australia, like since living here, I've had to renew my passport. So it meant that I then had to like go back to Immigration Australia and like send them all my new passport details so that they could transfer my visa over to my new passport. So
and could you, so you renewed your American passport from Australia? Okay.
Yeah, it was actually way easier than doing it in the US. Like they just, instead of sending it back to the US, it just went to, so we're in Melbourne. It just went to the consulate in Sydney. So I think the whole thing took like a month. Something like that. But it was way faster than when I've renewed it in the US.
And they gave you like extra pages.
Yeah, they gave me way more pages. Like my passport's so much thicker than it used to be.
Nice. Because they probably assume, right, that like if you're an expat, then you're gonna be like racking up the stamps. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what sorts of like restrictions did you have on your student visa and on your partner visa? Like I assume you couldn't work as on a partner visa.
I actually had no restrictions on mine. It was pretty awesome. Like as a partner, we had to do our own health care. But that was my only restriction. Like I could work for whoever I wanted to. I could work however many hours I wanted to. Like I had no restrictions besides healthcare on mine. So it was pretty sweet.
And the healthcare was actually provided through the university as well.
Yeah.
So being a student, I could cover both of us on that health insurance, which was really nice.
Yeah.
Coming to Australia, and I guess we'll get to that here in a second.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit more, or a little bit different.
Yeah, it's definitely been different,
but in terms of my restrictions, I just had to basically finish.
Yeah.
If that meant that I had to work a little bit, that was fine.
You basically just had to be a student in good standing.
A student in good standing, and I think generally they wanted me to be full time. I don't remember anything specific about part time, but I'm pretty sure it was full time student.
A full-time student.
Like enrolled as a full time student, which doing the PhD thing was actually quite easy because I was working my brains out. So there was something else I was going to mention though. Around that. The most stringent, how do I want to say this? I guess the most stringent policies that I ended up facing were actually from the university itself. And I was on a scholarship to do the work that I was doing through the, Ministry of Business and Innovation, so MB. And there were some really ridiculous bits of the fine print in that is common. Like if I hadn't finished, for whatever reason, I would have to pay back everything. All of the money that had been used to support me up until that point, which put a huge amount of pressure on. Like I read that the first day when I signed my contracts.
So this was when we were in New Zealand.
When we were in New Zealand, we already made the huge jump. And then I signed that contract. It was like the 1st of July in 2016. And I remember coming home to Annika and just like, we need to go for a walk. I really need to talk about this with you because this is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And like it didn't let up until I was done because it was always in the back of my head. Like if I go a little crazy and have to stop, or if something happens and I hurt myself and I have to stop, we owe them tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, there was, yeah. So I guess that's the point, is make sure that.
Make sure you read the fine print.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, at least in our case, the more stringent policies actually come from the organization that you're working for, not from the government.
Yeah.
For which, in general, the governments both here and in New Zealand seem like reasonably smoothly operating bureaucracies. Like, you can get things done pretty quick here, for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, in comparison to the U.S.,
That's true.
much faster.
Yeah.
With the exception of internet, that just never goes right.
The internet here is terrible.
Well, and setting it up is a freaking nightmare.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a whole other tangent.
A whole other story.
But both in Australia and New Zealand, it's really difficult to get your internet set up.
I think in both places, the first time we tried to set up internet, it took us like a month to get working internet in our apartments.
Not even kidding.
Like, it was ridiculous.
And when we moved to the place that we're in now, a year ago, it was another month.
Yeah.
Like,
and
we're already
literally
established.
we were literally going from like, we were keeping our internet with the same company.
Same company.
And we were like, we're just moving from this address to this address.
A month later.
Yeah. It was like, come on, guys. This cannot be this hard.
Yeah.
And was it from an address in Melbourne to another address? Like in Melbourne?
Yep.
Oh yeah. We were just moving from like one suburb of Melbourne to another suburb of Melbourne.
Maybe a mile and a half.
No, I think it was like 3 miles. We moved like 3 miles, and it took like a month for them to get our internet hooked up.
Yeah.
Wow.
In a city of 5.5 million people.
Yeah. Yeah. We were like, how is this possible?
How?
Yeah.
So
that's I think been the most baffling thing.
Yeah.
Out of a lot of the like getting your life set up type stuff that I saw you have a question about, like.
Well, that, and in New Zealand especially, like, New Zealand is not a warm country. Like, you think it would be because it's in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
But it's
lies. All lies.
Yeah, it's really rainy, really cold and windy, especially in Wellington where we were.
Yeah.
And none of the buildings have insulation or central heating.
Yeah.
So like we were in this apartment that had cinder block walls and single pane windows, and we had one space heater that we basically just like moved to whatever room we were in to keep warm. And like, we've lived in Minnesota, I've lived in Alaska, and I have never been colder in my life in a building than I have been in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Like, it was ridiculous. We got there and we were like, because we'd been looking at the temperatures and it would be like 50, 60, because we moved there during the winter.
Yeah. 40 degrees.
And we were like, oh, that'll be fine. And then we realized that was also the temperature in the apartment. And we were like, oh no, this is terrible.
You just can't get out of it.
So like we definitely did not bring enough warm clothes with us for New Zealand. Like it was.
Definitely do your homework.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a lot of cold places.
Yeah.
And I've never been as cold as I have been in New Zealand. Like it would be, 39 degrees and raining, and you just end up soaked because, for me, I was walking everywhere.
Yeah, because we didn't have a car when we first moved there.
So and I mean, Wellington is actually a really livable city. Like, you can walk everywhere.
Oh yeah, or take public transit.
Or take public transit, yeah, for sure. But what that means, especially if you're walking, is that you're outside in the rain and the wind all the time. And it's also just cold.
Well, it's also a very hilly city.
Yeah.
So
actually, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's nice because you get in shape because you're walking everywhere. But also like you get really sweaty because it's really humid. So you're like walking up these really steep hills and you get super sweaty. So your clothes are all kind of wet. And then you go and sit in a building that doesn't have heating and you're just like, I'm cold. But
I learned, so we do a lot of stuff outdoors, and living in New Zealand, I really learned the value of wool.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah. Like, I used to use synthetics and whatever, and no, just don't mess around with any of that stuff. If you're going to go somewhere like that, get some wool.
Yeah. Like we both have like full long underwear that's like merino wool at this point, and like lots of wool sweaters just because It keeps you so much warmer.
Yeah, they have this thing. It's a glorious thing. It's called a swan dry. It's this.
Gross.
I'm not gonna get it. Don't worry. But no, it's like this thick wool. I mean, it's scratchy wool, but it's this thick wool like overshirt that you can wear. They're amazing. They're amazing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, you know, how do people who are like grow up in New Zealand, you know, who are from New Zealand, how do they stay warm? And it must be that they know about the
Yeah, they just
Hot water
wear.
bottles. Wool.
Yeah, I never understood the point of having a hot water bottle and putting it in your bed until we moved to New Zealand, and then I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Like literally had never understood it until we moved there, and then I was like, oh, I totally get it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
They were
mean,
nice that you would like just curl up
yeah,
with
just
it. You
like
just sleep
curl
with
up
it kind
with
of
it, and I
huddled
was
around
like,
there.
I'm so cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, lots of hot water bottles are amazing, and wool is amazing. And the other thing I noticed in New Zealand, especially because it rains so much, is that most people they'd have like a wool sweater on, and then they'd wear shorts because your legs are going to get so wet walking everywhere that at least if you're wearing shorts, like you dry off quickly.
Yeah.
So you're not just like wearing wet pants all the time.
Yeah.
So that was like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like 95% of the people out walking do that.
Oh yeah.
Like on rainy days and stuff.
I always felt kind of weird because I'd be like the only person wearing pants.
Yeah, me too.
All right. That might be the soundbite. That's a really good little.
Yeah, no, New Zealand is. I mean, it's absolutely
beautiful.
gorgeous.
And honestly, I
It's
think
just, yeah, it's small, so it's small.
but you know, on in terms of the climate and stuff, I think if we had lived in like Christchurch,
Yeah,
we would have been a lot,
Auckland.
or Auckland, in terms of temperatures.
Yeah, we
we
would have been a lot happier. It's just like where Wellington is.
Yeah.
It's like right at the southern tip of the North Island, and
Right
it's right
next to the
by
Bass
the
Strait.
Bass Strait.
Yeah.
So all of the weather just blows right through
Or no,
there.
that's the Cook Strait.
Yeah,
Strait
no, that's
is
the
what
Cook
that is.
Strait. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the
sorry, we
Cook
got our
Strait.
straits wrong.
So all the weather just blows through there. So Wellington is referred to as Windy Welly because it is always windy there.
Yep.
And we did not realize that when we moved there, so we were not prepared for the
Yeah.
weather.
And the first summer that we had there, so summer is, you know, December, January, February, March, because it's in the southern hemisphere. And that first summer that we had there, we had a stretch of maybe 10 days where the weather was
Where it was like
mediocre.
sunny and maybe in the low 70s.
Yeah, maybe in the low 70s. And that was our
That was
summer
it.
that
That was
year.
our summer.
Like everything else was rainy and cold
Yeah.
and windy.
So it was
It
was
was
a rude awakening.
very much so. Because like as Annika said, like I planned on, you know, oh, it's the South Pacific. It's going to be warm. It'll be tropical. It's fine. They have ferns.
Yeah.
Boy, I just was not prepared for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it ended up being fine in the end. You know?
Yeah, I mean, we got used to it, but
Yeah, and we did both really end up loving the country. But just that initial shock of like, holy God, what did we get ourselves into?
yeah,
You know?
I would definitely recommend to look at the weather where you were moving.
And maybe investigate the building codes a little
Yeah, look at the building codes too, because that, like, honestly,
Yeah.
it hadn't even occurred to me that buildings wouldn't be insulated.
Yeah.
Like that's not something that like.
Yeah, I mean, we grew up in Colorado, living in California.
Yeah.
It's the same. Like things have insulation
Yeah.
and
it's
central
crazy.
heating, and like Minnesota, of course, you know.
Yeah.
But
So that was probably the most eye-opening thing, is we were just like, oh, nothing
very much
has-
not prepared
yeah,
for this.
very not prepared for how cold it is. Even though, like, comparatively, like, it's not actually that cold.
Yeah.
It's just that you can't get out of it.
Well, and it's a humid cold.
Yeah, and it was a
It,
humid
it
cold.
cuts straight to you, like
Right.
straight to your bones.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the thing that it's hard to prepare for, is the humid cold if you don't know, you know, what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the nitty gritty, like bureaucracy stuff. So you said that like the university provided healthcare for both of you, it sounds like, and was
Yeah.
that easy? What was, you know?
I mean, it was. I guess it was better.
easy.
It was easy, and it was better student health care than I had had any other place that I've been.
It didn't have dental or eye.
No, it didn't. But to be fair, like that wasn't at least the dental wasn't really a thing in any healthcare or any health insurance scheme there.
Yeah.
It seems like the thinking is more kind of, or I guess you have catastrophic coverage, but that just means that people use their catastrophic coverage and don't go until they have a problem, instead of maintaining. Anyway, that's a whole other ball of wax. But
yeah, I mean, we never really had to do that much stuff with healthcare.
Yeah. I had to do a couple of things.
You did, but
it was relatively easy.
Yeah. Like I went to the dentist there once and just went to like a GP a couple times just to get like prescription refills and that sort of stuff, and it was all pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was also in New Zealand for like less than a year before I moved to Australia, so
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I didn't have as much experience with it as he did.
And I mean, my experience with the student healthcare stuff was that it was reasonably easy. There was a GP, there were a couple of GPs on campus, so if you had something that needed to be done right away, you could go see them. Yeah, I think I saw him once or twice.
Yeah.
I didn't really have anything go terribly wrong, so that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a condition. So if anybody is moving to New Zealand and not doing a PhD or schooling of any kind, you do have to have health insurance, and the different health insurance plans will probably have different coverage and probably be easier or harder or more difficult to work with.
Yeah, I mean, both New Zealand and Australia have Medicare, but it's
nationalized healthcare.
Yeah, nationalized healthcare. But if you're there on a temporary visa, you don't qualify for it. So like that's when we get to talking about Australia, we can talk about that, but that's one of the conditions on my visa in Australia is that we have to have our own health care because we're not permanent residents.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely hit that. Did the university provide housing, or did you find your own housing?
We found our own.
So this is a fun story. So we flew in.
We did not find housing before we moved there because neither of us had ever been to Wellington.
No.
So we kind of wanted to see like the lay of the land, I guess, and see where the university was and all that before we signed a lease.
Yeah. Know what we were actually getting into and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we flew in, and the first week that we were there, we flew in, we got there on the 17th of June, 2016. We flew in, and that first week, we actually got an Airbnb with
we were in the Airbnb for 2 weeks.
It was only one.
It was only one?
It was only, we did everything really fast. So we got in, the people who were kind of the hosts there were, one of the man there was actually an American. So it was a little bit easier to like get to know and talk to, and kind of get some references and perspective on where to live and all that stuff, because and within that first week we got our phone set up, like mobile phone set up, we got our banking set up, and we got and we signed a lease, and we moved in the week after that. Like, we did all of that extremely fast because it was relatively quick to do.
It was really easy. I mean, we set up a bank. We set up banking before we moved, but to actually be able to access our bank, you had to like show up in person. Yeah. So we did that, but like we had already transferred money into the bank and just had to like go and get cards and that sort of stuff.
You actually just reminded me of something. On one of the stipulations for the student visa was also that I have enough money in a bank account in New Zealand to support me through the entirety of the visa.
Oh, I do remember that.
Yeah, we had to transfer like $20,000 or something like that.
Yeah, we also had to show them.
Yeah, we had to demonstrate it.
Yeah, we basically had to send them bank statements to prove that we had enough money.
Yeah.
And it was also like enough money to pay for tickets back to the US if we had to.
So they don't want you to get stuck there.
Yeah.
And it's a good idea, but it also really limits who can get in.
Yeah.
It's like, that was a huge challenge for us,
Well, I mean, we had more than enough money. We were fine, but it was definitely kind of weird, like getting bank statements and sending them to a foreign government and being like, look, see, we're not totally destitute.
Yeah.
But
I totally
Yeah.
forgotten about that condition.
yeah, I had to.
Yeah, that was the biggest condition that there was.
Yeah.
Ugh.
But in terms of like setting stuff up, once we got to New Zealand, honestly, like we definitely could have done more research before we moved there. But we were both working full time basically up until the last minute, and then we spent time visiting family, so we did not do that much research before we moved abroad. Which is something like, we definitely just jumped in. We were like, oh, it's fine, we'll figure it out. Which we did, but it would probably be better to have done a little bit more research beforehand.
Probably, but where's the fun in that?
Yeah, and I mean, part of the thing that I found challenging was just that all the companies are different, obviously.
Yeah.
So like, you move there and you're like, okay, I need to get a mobile phone, but you don't even know what the options are.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what the different companies are, or like what's a decent rate or anything.
What
Like
the networks are like. Or...
Yeah, so that, or like setting up internet, I was like, I don't know what the internet companies are, or like, so that was one thing that was actually really helpful doing the Airbnbs, because we could ask the people we were staying with, or like how to find an apartment. We were like, is there a website we should be looking at? So once again, this is all stuff we probably could have done beforehand, but we just didn't have time.
Yeah.
So like they turned us on to, and now I can't even remember the website, where it was like apartment listings and all that. And like they told us like some neighborhoods that were good to live in, and but that,
I think one of the kind of important things that they passed along to us is that we didn't want to be down in the valley.
Yeah.
Because those are just damp and cold and dark.
Yeah.
So yeah, we ended up in a suburb called Brooklyn, on the corner of like Washington and Cleveland Street, in an apartment complex that actually overlooked the bay right there. So we were on a hill. Only
if it was sunny.
Oh yeah.
So probably like half the time we couldn't actually see the bay, but it's probably more than half we couldn't see the bay, but it was good just because lots of the, especially in New Zealand, because it is so humid, lots of the houses like down in the valleys or like on the side of the hills that only had sun for half the day have mold problems just because they never get a chance to dry out.
Yeah.
So where we were, like we didn't have any problem with mold because we had like these huge windows and we got a ton of, when it was sunny, we got a ton of sun.
Yeah.
But that was definitely something like especially all of Ross's clothes, just because he was there for so much longer. Like most places, despite the fact that it's incredibly humid there, no one has dryers. You just hang dry your clothes. So like a lot of Ross's clothes still have this like musty smell to them. And I think I got out early enough that like mine didn't get that, but like a bunch of our stuff just still smells musty because we were hang drying it in a very humid environment for however many years.
Days to dry.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's I've encountered that too, and do people just have methods that like they don't teach us, that they use for drying their clothes? I don't know.
Well, I mean, most people in Australia don't have dryers either, but here, especially during the summer, you put your clothes out for 5 minutes and they're dry. So
I have literally done that. It's been,
you literally just like stick it outside in the sun and then pull it back in. You're like, okay, I can fold these and put them away now.
It was like the day that happened, it was like 45 degrees Celsius. So that's like 115 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. And just the sun here is something, like in this part of the world, is just something else. Like it's way more intense here.
Same thing in New Zealand, just because like the ozone is so thin.
Yeah.
That
I know actually feel like you're cooking.
Yeah, I know everyone in the US says like, oh, be careful, put on sunblock when it's cloudy because you can still sunburn. It is legitimately true here.
Yeah.
Like we're having high UV days, which is like
a legitimate thing.
They announce it like with the weather every day. They're like, oh, this is how high the UV is going to be.
Here's our
and it's
UV
like
index.
a range of 0 to 14.
Yeah.
And on the days that it's a high UV day, you go outside and you can sunburn in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And
at sea level.
At sea level. And like you can feel it. Like it actually feels like your skin kind of hurts.
Yeah.
And
your
like
skin aches.
It feels like you're baking. Like it is the weirdest thing I have ever felt in my life.
It's crazy. There are also extremely high cases of skin cancer here and in New Zealand because
understandably.
of that. Yeah.
But like growing up in Colorado, like we often went hiking at elevation, so like 14,000 feet, 10,000 feet.
Yeah.
And the sun is more intense here at sea level than it was at those elevations. Like it just, honestly, some days it hurts. Like you go outside in the sun and you're like, ah.
Or like, you'll be sitting in your car and like glass reflects UV. But because you're sitting in your car and you can still feel the UV,
still
the UV in your arms. It's like, oh my God, where do we move?
Yeah.
We talk about that.
It is crazy.
Often.
There are a bunch of, one of the guys I work with here is a redheaded Scotsman, and he wears sunblock in our office because we have like these huge windows that go around our office, and he wears sunblock in our office so that he doesn't get sunburned through the windows.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, well, so does Qua. Qua also wears sunblock.
Does he? Oh, maybe you should start wearing some sunblock.
I should. I really should be wearing sunblock at all times, but
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like even in the US, they say just put on sunblock every day, like no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
But okay, well, I've gathered all these questions over the course of the past like few minutes. So it sounds like getting some sort of like, some sort of like local to ask about things like the internet, the phone companies, all of these little things. You have to make choices and you don't quite know. And it's pretty easy to find someone who's like willing to share what they know with you, I think, because.
Yeah, especially like, I mean, we were in an Airbnb, so, and our hosts, like we were actually with them. It wasn't one of the ones where you just like check in on your own, you have the house to yourself.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. And I think, honestly, in our case, I think it was super helpful that one of the people was an American expat, because then like he had done this, and so he kind of knew what we were going through, and so he was more than willing to help.
And I mean, it wouldn't even, like if you went to stay with somebody, they wouldn't even necessarily have to be an American, but somebody who's been through the process, who's moved to a different country and has that perspective.
Yeah. Or I mean, even a local, because they'll know like, oh, these are the internet companies, these are the phone companies. This is like, this is the website you go to buy like used furniture and
I mean,
that sort of stuff.
That was actually, so the way that we kind of furnished, I guess we got a furnished apartment, but the way that we kind of fleshed out stuff was by going to Salvation Army in St. Vincent de Palma, or whatever. De Paulo, that one. And just getting, plates and forks and spoons and stuff for the all secondhand that you just go home and you clean.
Yeah.
And I think we ended up stocking our kitchen for like $30 New Zealand, and that's like $17 at the time. It was like $17 American.
Yeah, I mean that's one nice thing about Australia and New Zealand is they both have, they call them op shops, but it's basically like secondhand shops. They have them all over the place, and they're really good. So you can like furnish an apartment through them for very inexpensive if you want to.
And failing that, like they have this thing called Gumtree. And what's
that's here.
Yeah, what's the one in New Zealand? I don't remember either.
But they also have like
it's like Craigslist but better.
Yeah.
There aren't any sketchy ass people on it.
Yeah, it's not as sketchy. They also have, especially in Australia, they have, it's called hard rubbish collection. Yeah. But it's where if you have like a dresser you want to get rid of, you can put it out on the side of the street and the city will come and collect it. But then people can actually go to those locations and get stuff that they need.
If they want it.
Yeah, if you need it. I mean, it's all used, but you can go to like the hard rubbish collection places and like get furniture and
and a lot of it's really still really good furniture as well. Like there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of like finding out these details, like for me, I would think of like expat groups on Facebook. Maybe you'd like get on and say, what should I know, or what should I do when I get there? But how did you?
A good idea.
That would have been a great idea.
Like, did you all have any instructions or?
No, we definitely didn't do that. We kind of, I mean, especially when we moved to New Zealand, there were a bunch of other Americans in his program.
Yeah.
So we basically just talked to people like that.
Well, and I mean, I got in pretty good with my friends there. I made a bunch of friends in the department that I was in, and so those, and I mean, a bunch of, it wasn't just Americans. There were Kiwis and, you know,
A bunch of
Brits, people. I mean, and really people from all over the world. There's a guy there now who's from Georgia, the country of Georgia. You know, there were a bunch of people from India. Just a bunch of. It's a really good cross section of people. You know, and so it was really good to kind of have that friend group.
Yeah.
In place of like an American expat, you know, Facebook group, actually having friends around you from totally different walks of life and totally different places was actually really, really cool.
I think honestly, both in New Zealand and here, we've actually kind of avoided other Americans.
A little bit.
Just because, I don't even know why. Like we wanted to be more entrenched in the culture, I guess, and really experience it, and not be those people who are constantly like, oh, I miss this so much about the US and I miss that so much. And like, we really wanted to just experience it.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, that's also how we travel.
Yeah. But I mean, like, we don't, I mean, I've been in Melbourne for almost 4 years now, and I don't have a single American friend. Like, I have a bunch of friends from Australia and a bunch of like people from the UK, but I don't think I have a single American friend. And like, I'm totally fine with that. Like, I don't, and it doesn't bother me at all.
The other half of that is that you don't always, or you can't always find random Americans that you can make friends with as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you know, I guess my advice would be, don't go somewhere where all you want to talk to are other Americans. Go somewhere that like you want to become entrenched in the culture, because those are the people you're going to interact with every single day.
Yeah.
You know, and be accepting of that, and understand that you're in their culture. You're the one that's coming to their place.
Yeah, and while everything might seem weird to you, like, that is the culture that you're living in, and it's totally normal here.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be complaining about it, like, essentially no one's going to like you, because they're going to be like, why are you here? Why are you here if all you're going to do is complain about it? And I mean, there are like, we complain about the weather in New Zealand and like the heating and that sort of stuff, but it was an amazing culture. Like, I loved
Kiwis
it.
Complain about that.
Yes, they do. They do.
Just to be fair,
it's not just us.
Every Kiwi understands what Wellington weather is like.
Yes, and as soon as you say like, I lived in Wellington, they're like, ooh.
Like all of them understand that. So it's very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just expect to not know the culture and be open to different things that are outside of your culture.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think
I mean, one of the struggles that I had was when we moved to New Zealand. I had this kind of assumption that it was going to be a little bit like Little America, you know, where you're going to have some American culture. You know, maybe it won't be too much, but there'll be some there. And the reality is that no, there's not. It's just a totally different place. And while we speak the same language, you know,
we don't really speak the same language.
We don't really speak the same language.
Like, just with all the slang and the spelling differences and all of that. Like, it's we both speak English, but
we don't speak.
It's very different.
English.
Yes,
or we didn't. We do now.
Yeah.
And all the spelling stuff was actually a real challenge for me. I'm dyslexic. And so they'll flip letters, or they'll add extra letters. So like, spelling has always been a challenge for me. And now I have to contend with like extra U's and stuff.
Or like R's and E's will be flipped. So like center instead of ER is RE at the end. And so stuff like, or like enroll only has one L instead of two. And
and we both write for a living. So yeah.
I mean, at this point, like, I just do it without thinking about it, like put the extra U's in and all that stuff. But when we first moved here, it was definitely challenging.
Yeah, because people look at you like you're an idiot. And they're like, why did you spell all this stuff wrong? It's like, I didn't spell anything wrong. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's a really important caveat, what you were saying before about, you know, just like think maybe about why you want to move overseas, right? Like why you want to go where you're trying to move.
Yeah.
But yeah, I lived in England for a while as a kid, and so I learned those alternate spellings. And even now, it's like I don't know, you know, like theater. I don't know if it's spelled ER or RE, even in Kansas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and what we find is that we screw up. Like there are words that we use in the U.S. and then there are words that we use here, and then there are words that are used in New Zealand, and we
Just like
screw
to
up
describe
the same thing, and we screw up all the time what word we use.
Like, so take a cooler, for example. In New Zealand, it's called a chili bin.
Chili bin.
And here it's called an esky. And so like because I work in environmental consulting, so it's lots of like soil sampling and water sampling and all of that. So you're constantly sending samples off to the lab. And I remember for the first couple months I was in Australia, I'd call the lab and I'd be like, hey, I have some coolers for you to pick up. And they would just be like, you have what?
They don't know what that is.
And I was like, oh no, what do you guys call it here? It's not a chili bin, it's something else. And so I'd have to I was like, I can't remember what it's called. Or like Ross and I will be talking and I'll just look at him and I'm like, oh, what's the word for this in the US? Like, I know we have a word for it.
And it takes us both legitimately
like,
a couple minutes to like come up with it.
What we call it in the US. Like, pram, which is like in the US it's a stroller.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll just like the Australian word comes to mind and I'm like, I know there's a different word in the US and I cannot think of what it is.
Yeah.
It's just yeah, it's funny. Like our families get a kick out of it because like Ross has kind of fought it a little bit more than I have, like picking up all the slang.
I've still picked up a lot of slang.
But,
I mean, I've picked up the slang. It's using the slang.
Yeah. But like we'll be talking to our families and we'll say something and you can tell they're kind of like, what did they say? Because like they don't know, but we just say it without even thinking about it.
Because that's the language, that's the vernacular that's used here, and it's just like that's how we speak every day.
Yeah, and like everyone I work with is Australian, so they all speak like that, and so I don't even notice.
The majority of people I work with are Australian.
Yeah.
But
but just getting back to like,
that was a nice tangent.
Yeah, so one of the problems that I had with New Zealand is just because it is so small and the field that I'm in is also kind of small and specialized. So I was not able to find work at all in New Zealand. So I ended up working like a part-time job that I hated. And the visa process to get to Australia actually took so much longer than I thought it would. So when we first moved to New Zealand, I talked with the company I work with now. And they're like, oh yeah, we have a project we want you to work on. We're going to bring you over. It'll take like 2 weeks to get the visa sorted out. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really fast.
Yeah.
And so this would have been in like July.
Yeah, it was a couple of days after we got here. You talked to Peter for the first time.
Yeah. And then I didn't actually end up getting the visa and moving to Australia until the following May.
So it's like 10 months.
So it was like 10 months.
But then that wasn't the bureaucracy that took that long. Some of it was also
so they had like the company, like the person who had started working on my visa left the company, and so then someone else had to pick it up. But so it was
subsequent visa has been reasonably quick.
But it was a totally different process in Australia because my company was sponsoring me to come over. So I was the first person this company had ever done that for. So they had to fill out all this paperwork to basically be able to sponsor someone. So that was what a lot of the holdup was initially.
Didn't the company also have to post the job for X amount of time?
So they had to post the job and prove that there was no one who could fill it in Australia. And then they also had to like do all these market study things so that they could get basically approved to sponsor someone from abroad. And then they had to nominate me for the visa. And then once that was approved, then I could submit my visa application. So it was kind of like a 2-step process, or 3-step, I guess, because they had to get approved to be able to sponsor people. So it ended up taking like 10 months before I could move to Australia. And the first visa I got was was kind of ridiculous. So in Australia, when you start working for a company, you will have a trial period where if they decide that they don't like you or it's not working out, they can let you go and they don't have to give you severance pay.
Yeah.
So when they first nominated me, they only nominated me for that trial period. So my first visa in Australia was for like 4 months. And I was like, well, that's kind of useless.
Yeah.
So I came over to Australia for, I think by the time I got it and had sorted out flights and everything, I think I was over here for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so it got down to like 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave. And I was like, okay, I like the company. Do you guys like me? Like, should I apply for another visa? And they're like, yeah, no, we love you. You should apply for another visa. And I was like, okay, I don't know how this is going to work. So I figured that I would be going back to New Zealand, like while my visa got sorted. And so I applied literally like 2 weeks before I was set to leave for New Zealand, and immediately got what's called a bridging visa. So it's this visa where it basically means you can keep working, but you can't leave the country while they make a decision on your actual visa. So suddenly I went from being like 2 weeks away from going back and spending time with my husband to being like, oh, I can't leave the country until they decide what they're going to do with my visa application. So like my company, the way it worked for me housing wise initially was the company I was working for had an apartment up in Queensland because they had a huge project up there and they always had staff up there. So I basically just moved to Queensland and worked on that project for the first 3 months. So I was able to live in the apartment, so I didn't have to arrange anything besides like getting a new mobile number and setting up a new bank account, which was really nice. And then the last 2 weeks, they're like, oh, we'll have you come back down to Melbourne and you can just like do stuff in the office for 2 weeks before you leave. And then I got the bridging visa and they were like, oh, okay. Because like they had been putting me up in a hotel for 2 weeks in Melbourne. So in that like 2 week period, I found a apartment with a roommate and basically just like, I told her, I was like, look, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't know how long the bridging visa is going to last. I don't know if my next visa is going to get approved. So it was kind of like my roommate understood that it was very unknown how long I was going to be there. I think I ended up living with her for like 1.5 years. But that also made it easy because it was like a furnished apartment. So I didn't have to deal with internet or signing a lease. Well, I signed a lease with her. Like, yeah, I sublet from her, but I didn't have to deal with any of that other like setting up your home type stuff, which was good. Like I didn't have to get furniture or anything. But then I think it was like another 3 months or so before my visa was approved. And it was a 2-year visa. So I was like, oh, cool. Here for 2 years and I can leave the country again. But Ross mostly just came over and visited. But so the only condition, I had 2 conditions on my visa. Since it was a employer sponsored one, I had to continue working for the company that sponsored me. Mm-hmm. And if I left that company for whatever reason, I had 60 days to find another company who would sponsor me. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I would have to leave the country. Mm-hmm. And I had to have my own health insurance. So those were the only 2 conditions on my visa. Oh, and I also had to work full time for the company, but I mean, I was going to do that anyway. So, and then, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Let's go back like 10 steps, I think, and talk about so how did you sign up for a new number? Do you just go to a phone store, and how did you sign up for a new account?
I was going to mention that we actually took our phones from the US. We had them long enough and we had them unlocked because phones in the US are actually like locked for American use.
Yeah.
So if you have to, well, I guess depending on the phone and how much you own it, you have to have that unlocked for use abroad. Whereas that's not really the case anywhere else that I've been.
Yeah,
Like I can stick a SIM card in my phone anywhere and it's fine.
Yeah, from anywhere in the world. So
Yeah.
now, like both of our phones, because we unlocked them, like I basically just got a new SIM card and stuck it in my phone and it worked.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So
and that's legitimately all you have to do is go,
Yeah.
you know, get a number, get a SIM card, stick it in your phone as long as it's unlocked. If it's not unlocked,
it won't work.
it won't work. So I think you have to have owned your phone for like 2 years or something
Like that. I mean, you can also just go to a phone company here, obviously, and like
get
but
one.
One of the weird things here is they actually check your visa before they'll let you sign up for a phone plan.
In Australia, they'll check.
In Australia. So for the first, I don't know, 6 months I was here, I was just on a month-to-month plan.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't sign up for an actual legitimate plan until I had a visa that was good for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
So once I had a visa that was good for 2 years, I just like switched over to a standard plan because I was like, this is stupid. I'm not paying month to month anymore.
And we actually went to get me a phone when I moved over here a couple of years ago. I'd been here for 6 months or something like that, working off of a month-to-month plan. We went to get me a new SIM card and on a phone plan. And because our visa was so short-timed.
No, it was because you weren't on my visa at that point. You were still on the scholar visa.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I was on a different visa.
Yeah.
So my visa didn't, it was like a year-long visa.
So they wouldn't let him get a phone plan.
No. So, which was extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
Like, who would think that people need to know your visa status to get a friggin' phone?
Yeah, like we had to take our passport to the phone place to get a phone plan.
Yeah, but not in New Zealand.
Not in New Zealand. Yeah, in New Zealand they didn't care, but here, like
very much so.
I remember when I first went to get a plan, I went to the phone company that we'd been using, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to like sign up for an actual phone plan," and they had me basically all signed up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, can I get your passport?" And I was like, "Passport?" And they're like, yeah, we need to check your visa status. And I was like, you need to do what? And so I actually had to like leave and come back the next weekend because I was like, I didn't bring my passport with me. Like, why would I need my passport?
Why would you need your passport for a phone?
Yeah. But yeah, so that was how I got my phone, is I just got a new SIM card when I came to Australia. And like in the airports in New Zealand and Australia, as soon as you get through customs, there will be little booths there that are like for Vodafone or different phone companies. And they're like, oh, do you need a SIM card? Here, you can buy a SIM card and just go on a monthly plan. So it's like, it's really easy.
Yeah.
So
Vodafone
it's just like, yeah.
Or what's the other one?
I don't know. There are a bunch. But your phone has to be unlocked to be able to just like stick a SIM card in it.
Yeah. For which I've never had, like, I bought a phone in New Zealand and I've never had an issue like, I need to unlock fucking phone or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's just something I ran into in the US. Or like coming from the US to this part of the world.
But it is something important to ask. Like if your phone is unlockable. Yeah,
because not all of them are.
Not all of them are. And what the term limit is on being able to unlock that. Because if you're going to buy a phone in the US and then move abroad in the next 6 months or something like that, just save your money and
just
wait
get
6
a
months.
phone. Just get a phone
It's
here.
not worth the time and the hassle.
Yeah. But,
yeah, I have had a phone store make a photocopy of my passport before, and like felt like that was really sketchy. Like,
that's dodgy.
Yeah, it's weird.
Another thing that's struck me as so bizarre, like having your passport scanned, bank numbers aren't nearly as secret here as they are in the US. So like you give people your bank details and they'll transfer money into your account routinely.
Like it's a very routine thing where people will be like, oh yeah, just give me your bank details and I'll send you money.
Yeah.
Well, just
like your friends, when you sign a lease, you give them your bank details. Yep. Like
I mean, it was that one was so foreign to me when we moved to New Zealand. It was like, you want my what?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
It was
No.
very weird. Like at this point, I'm used to it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I'll just send you my bank details, and you can like, if you go out to lunch with a friend, and you can just transfer me some money. But when we first moved abroad, we were like, wait, what?
No.
I'm not giving you my bank info.
That's a terrible idea.
Yeah, so that was definitely something weird. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah. I still find it bizarre.
Yeah, I still find it kind of weird when people will be like, oh yeah, here are my bank details, just transfer money over. And I'm like, okay.
Seems strange.
But
Like those dodgy things where you're like, this doesn't seem right, you know, because it'll be passport stuff or bank stuff or you know,
all
visa
those
stuff or whatever. And
all
it's just
those
like,
numbers
why
in
do
the
you do
US
that?
where you're like taught to protect these with your life.
Yeah.
You come here and everyone's just like, oh yeah, here's my details. And you're like, okay. Or like checks. No one writes checks here. If you need to get a check for anything, you have to go to the bank and they will charge you $15 to print out a check for you.
Yeah.
Like you do not have a checkbook.
Yeah. And everything
so
is
weird.
Everything is PayWave. Like you'll have a credit card that has a little chip in it. They just started introducing those in the US when we were getting ready to leave. You know, the ones that you kind of stick in the little machine.
Here you just like tap it.
Yeah, it's an RFID tag and you tap it and you're done.
That's definitely becoming more commonplace in the US, but most of you still insert into the chip.
That's how I guess how they've been doing that, or how they've been doing transactions for like 2 decades or something.
Wow.
You guys are just extremely behind the curve on that one, but it's really nice.
Yeah, it's much quicker.
Yeah, so that's like if instead of using a check, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Really. The other thing, speaking of banking, it's extremely difficult to get a credit card.
If you're not a permanent resident, you basically can't get a credit card.
Yeah, and in New Zealand, it was even more different than that from here. Credit cards, there's actually a stigma around credit cards where like the only people who have credit cards are people who can't afford anything. And like it was really bizarre. Like we went to try and establish credit in New Zealand. Like, oh, I don't know. You probably don't want one of those.
That,
very
like,
sternly.
Yeah, like people look down on you if you have a credit card there.
Well, and I mean, we were trying. We have good credit in the U.S. And so we've always kind of tried to keep that up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just
it's very challenging here, just because like most banks or like credit card companies will not let you get a credit card unless you are a permanent resident or a citizen.
Yeah.
So like I've been living in Australia for almost 4 years and I don't have a credit card.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important.
So it definitely means you have to be way more cognizant of your finances.
Yeah, and your spending habits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's totally good. It's
thing,
a great thing.
But it's very weird moving from the US.
Yeah, where, you're thrown credit card offers in the mail every day.
Yeah.
So speaking of bank accounts, how did you set one up? Did you need a lot of special documents or was it easy or?
No, it was really easy.
No.
We actually, so when we moved to New Zealand, when we were moving to New Zealand, we were like, oh, we'll go with ANZ Bank because it's like in Australia and New Zealand. So
and if we wanted to go to the UK, there are a couple of branches in the UK.
Yeah, we were like, but it'll be easy for like if I'm working in Australia, like we'll just use the same bank account.
We can transfer money.
No.
They're independent companies.
They're totally independent companies. They have the same name, but they like do not work together because they're in different countries.
They have no connection to each other.
Yeah.
They're totally independent entities.
Which was really annoying.
Which was super frustrating.
Yeah, so that was like how we chose a bank when we first moved abroad, and
like where we would have the most utility for the two of us.
Yeah, like living in 2 different countries, and I don't even remember how we set up a bank. It was like we were able to do it online though, and like initially say, "Hi, I'm moving here from abroad.
Yeah.
I'm going to transfer some money," and then before you can access it, like you have to go into a branch in person.
Yeah, and say, "Hi, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. Here's my passport," and then they do the rest of the steps.
Yeah, I think it was like 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, it was super
hard.
easy. And it was the same process in Australia. Like before I moved here, I set up a bank in the Australian version of ANZ.
Before we knew.
And then when I first moved to Australia, I was in Melbourne for like 3 days, just meeting people in my office. And so I just walked to the closest branch and was like, "Hi, I'm Annika. Here's my passport." And so they like opened up my bank account and gave me my debit card and that. So it was very, very easy.
Cool.
But
great. Well, we've reached an hour, and I think if we want people to like watch this, we might want to. But I feel like we've hit, a lot of important, just like principles, right, for how you go about finding.
Yeah. I mean, Australia is pretty similar to New Zealand, I'd say, for most of it. I mean, I've had to do a couple different visas at this point, just because Australia keeps changing their visa system. So, like the visa I was on when we moved here no longer exists, and so then we applied for a longer term visa, and my company was willing to sponsor Ross when he moved over. And actually right now we're applying for permanent residency, so that's
a whole
other type of visa. But once we get permanent residency, like we'll be able to qualify for Medicare and all that stuff, which will be nice.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention on the back of the banking stuff was actually nothing to do with banking, but is very relevant for driving. So driver's licenses, if you have one from the US, you're actually, you have to go down to basically the exchange place, and you basically get a driver's license almost immediately. They'll put one out that day.
It was really easy. Like we didn't have to do a driver's test or anything.
No.
Which we found really weird because like you drive on the left-hand side of the road here, and like there are different markings on the road and different signs and different rules.
Yeah.
But both in Australia and New Zealand, we basically just walked up and we're like, "Hey, we've been driving for more than 5 years or whatever it was," and they're like, "Cool, here's your license."
Yeah. There's a specific limit. I think it is like 5 years. And if you're over that, then they don't really care.
They don't care. They just give you a license.
Yeah.
Like it depends. It obviously depends what country you're from.
Yeah.
But the US is one of the ones where they're just like, "Okay, cool. Here's a license. Go to town."
Yeah, because I've seen those like international driver's licenses, but have you ever messed with one of those or no? Like,
no, we just have, when we were in New Zealand, we got New Zealand driver's licenses. And then when we moved here, we got Australian ones. So
cool.
Which is actually extremely handy because you need it.
It's another form of ID. I mean,
it's another form of ID.
Everything that comes with that, like in addition to your passport, having a driver's license for the country that you're in is
that
really
has like
helpful.
your address and all that stuff.
And that you're actually, that you live here, that you're not just some random tourist.
Yeah, and it is nice because it means previously we would have had to take our passports to get like anything done. But now we can just like show our driver's license and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll just use that." So it makes it so much easier having a driver's license.
Yeah.
And does it say like nationality US on the license? Really?
No,
it's just a
standard Australian driver's license. So, but I mean, it proves that we live here and that we have like some stability. So, I mean, I think we had to have. Did we have to have a certain visa when we got them? I don't think we did. No. I'm pretty sure we just went in and like.
I live here now.
Yeah, I mean, we had to prove our address.
Yeah. Like,
but I mean,
bill or.
You have to do that in the US. So.
And I mean, honestly, that the whole process was really quite easy.
Yeah.
Here, I think they took 10 days to send you your driver's license.
Yeah. Well, here it's a little different. So it's more expensive to get a driver's license in Australia, and you pay for like. So we we also got shorter driver's licenses, so we'll have to renew ours.
Yeah.
I should probably look and see when ours expire. I think we only got 2-year driver's licenses because it was like 4 times more expensive if you got the like 5-year driver's license. So we're like, we'll just get the short ones, which retrospectively was probably stupid since we're going to be here for a while. But
at the time we didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like you'll run into stuff. I know we need to get going, but you'll run into stuff where it's like, well, I think I'm going to be here for 3 years. So I'm going to get 3 years worth of this thing. And then you're there for 5 and you're like, well, well, apparently that 3-year idea that I thought was going to save me money is actually going to cost me money now.
Yeah.
So you'll run into a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
if you do make the jump.
That's one of the things that I found really interesting, because when we were first looking at moving abroad, we were very much like, we're going to live.
We'll be in New Zealand for 3 years.
We'll be there for 3 years, and then we're going to come back to the US. And then,
Life just happened.
This June will be 5 years.
Yeah.
We're applying for permanent residency. I'm pregnant. Like, we're going to have a baby that's born here in August.
Yeah.
Life
happens.
Yeah, like it's funny because like I think my parents were like, oh yeah, you guys are definitely going to stay longer than 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the interesting things, one of Ross's advisors from his PhD,
he's also
an American. He and his wife are from the Midwest.
Really good people.
He did his PhD in Germany, and then he's been in New Zealand for like a decade or 15 years, or he's been there for a while. But one of the things he said to us when we moved to New Zealand is he was like, yeah, if you've only lived in one country, it's really easy to go back to the US. But as soon as you get to that second country,
it's next to impossible.
It's next to impossible because you realize like how different everything is. And in both New Zealand and Australia, like the work-life balance is phenomenal. Like it is so much better than in the US. And just things like having a kid here, like the healthcare is good, the schools are safe, like gun laws are reasonable, like all those things that you kind of worry about in the US where you're like, oh, is there going to be a school shooting? Like that doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it did once in what, 94? Or was that 96?
It was something like that. There was one really big mass shooting in Australia, and they basically banned all semi-automatic weapons, and there's never been a mass shooting again. Go figure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like when we were just living in New Zealand, I think we were both still kind of like, okay, this is like a 3-year thing.
Yeah.
But now that we live in Australia, like we both love Australia. We have really good friends here. We both have good jobs.
We have a life here.
I would much rather raise our kid here. Like we have cats. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. Like after just New Zealand, I was like, okay, we can move back to the US and I'll be okay. But after moving to another country, I'm like, nope. Yeah. I'm like, I don't think I could go back to the US anymore. Just like seeing how like all the different social services work here, and I don't think I could.
Well, and I mean that goes to something more fundamental, like America in terms of it's good and it's bad, but there's this like hyper individualist attitude, and here it's a little bit more like community focused. You know, we're part of a community. We're not just two people stuck out somewhere. You know? And that real feeling of community provides a lot of cohesion in the society itself.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why both Australia and New Zealand have done so well with COVID.
Yeah.
Like we haven't had a COVID case in Victoria, which is the state we're in over 3 weeks at this point.
Yeah. And we've gone up to like 3 months before.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot because like they put restrictions in place and everyone was like, okay, this sucks, but this is for the greater good.
Yeah.
And everyone followed them.
Yeah.
Like we had a lockdown for like 4 months where we weren't allowed to go more than 3 miles from our house.
Yeah. We had curfews.
We
couldn't be out past 8 o'clock.
Like you had.
We could be outside for 1 hour a day.
Yeah. You had very strict mask mandates.
Yeah.
And everyone followed them.
Yeah.
And because of that, like after that lockdown, we went for like 3 months without having a single case.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, so at this point, life is almost back to normal here.
It is back to normal. Like you can go to the pub, you can go to the cinema.
Yeah, you can do all that stuff.
Or you can go to the bar, you can go to the movies.
Yeah, like you have to wear masks on public transit and in grocery stores, but that's it.
Yeah.
And
that's it.
But I think a lot of it is just like the sense of community, and it's like it's really nice.
It's really
like,
nice to live somewhere that has a community.
We really love it here.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, what recording at least.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Annika and Ross.